Welcome, everybody, to episode 132 of Axioms on Trial. Today, we'll be talking about deconstructing from Christianity. And I'll bring up. Thank you, Amy, for coming and joining
Yeah,
us.
thanks for having me.
Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Well, I met you on TikTok. I talk about all the taboo things, politics and religion, but mostly religion. I host discussions in a live streaming platform with questions that people don't really like to talk about, and interface with people who kind of hold very like loosely founded ideas on Christianity. And so that is how we got acquainted. Is that what we were looking for here?
Yeah. What is your background, and how long were you a Christian for?
So I participated in evangelical Christianity from the age of 4 until 36. So an active Bible believing church going Christian for over 30 years. I was raised in like the Baptist doctrine and denomination, and then Bible churches later in life. And I was married to a pastor, a youth pastor, and subsequently divorced. But I've been on kind of like a up and down roller coaster of, I hate the words faith journey. I hate that phrase, but what else do you call it? For about 8 years now.
8 years. Interesting. Okay, so you really were entrenched in the culture and in the ideology and for the majority of your life.
Yes, yes, it was my entire identity for 3 decades of my life.
Wow. Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, I consider myself very lucky because I don't have any sort of that kind of religious background. I started off being sort of agnostic, and then looking at different arguments, and came out of that pretty quickly an atheist, and managed to avoid all of that, trauma. And um, I guess I'm very curious in understanding, like, what is it that led you down this path? What is it that led you to deconstruct? What has the process been like?
Well, so I've journaled most of my life, and I can look back on the journals that I kept as a 20 something into my early 30s. I think that I was actively deconstructing even then. I just had really hard questions that were answered with mostly platitudes, or scriptures like Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Lean not on your own understanding. But the the thing that actually was where I like washed my hands of excuse me, church, was really silly. It wasn't like there was this one moment or epiphany. It
Mhm.
just I was going, and then one day realized how false the church service felt. So that was like step one of stepping away from the culture itself, but not from the belief system in any way, shape, or form. So that was approximately like 2014. And I started really, really reading the Bible and digging into different questions that I had um, that I never had answered in church. And I read the Bible all the way front to back for probably the third time in my life, but with just a different perspective. And that was kind of the beginning of the undoing for so much of what I thought was truth. Um, but the snag in my Christian sweater has always been and will always be how modern Christianity views women and their role. And that was kind of like the step one on the journey of like figuring out, well, do I have to be silent in church? And realizing that that was a load of,
Yeah.
fill in the blank. Um, but there wasn't really one particular thing. There was that church experience, which I talk about on TikTok. It was really, really silly. I was sitting in a church service, and the pastor was giving what they call an altar call, which is just like a call to action, where they say, like, if you have made a faith decision today, raise your hand, or if you need us to pray for you, raise your hand. And the pastor did this really weird thing where he was like, yes, I see you, I see you. And I'm sitting at the back of the church in kind of like an elevated space. And I can tell that no one's like raising their hands. And this is all just for feeling like everybody that went to church and paid their tithe that day could leave and feel like they had um, a particular experience. So that was probably the first step of realizing that things weren't real is the
Yeah.
way for me for yeah. So that was that. And then from there it was just a lot of scholarship, and then of course like some apathy. But like that was 2014, and then for a couple of years I just didn't really care. I was like still considered myself a Christian. I still prayed, I still read the Bible when I wanted to. But then, like a lot of other people, my story starts to converge with theirs in 2015, 2016 through the presidential election and the evangelical Christian response to Donald Trump, and um, and the social justice issues that became headlines and the church's response to that, and how everything that they did and said was being backed up by words in the Bible, which led me back to more intense scholarship.
Right. Yeah, I think it's mind-boggling to me that any Christian would follow Trump on any level, considering he's the complete opposite of everything that Jesus preached. Like the cognitive dissonance there is just shocking to me.
It is. It
Mm.
is. It's and I think I read a book called Jesus and John Wayne, which everybody that's deconstructed has read that, I think, by this point. And it tells kind of the story of how the evangelical church in America came to be and how it is this huge, for lack of a better phrase, a political action committee in a lot of ways, and how these two things are in bed together. And that the single issue for them being involved in politics is the issue of pro-life versus pro-choice, and like the one who is voting, or the one who has the pro-life stance on their platform, that's the one that God would endorse, of course. So that was, for me, that was the justification that they had. But I think it goes quite a bit deeper than that. But it was just the church's response to, um, moreover than just Trump. I mean, if you think back on what was happening in America in 2016, 2017, all the way up until today, like what became really, really a daily headline was social justice issues. And growing up, I was told to emulate Christ, to write his words on my heart, and to be considered like that would be my goal, to be as Christ-like as possible. And I saw people hurting and marginalized communities suffering at the hands of evangelical Christians, and I could not reconcile that. So that was another layer of it. So it was more than just Trump,
Yeah,
although he was the catalyst for a lot of those other things as well.
sure. The whole pro-life thing is so bizarre to me because it's not even biblical. Um, at least as far as I understand it. I don't know what your position on that is, but
Oh, I am pro-choice, with like with all of my body. Um, I I don't think it's anyone else's business, and whether or not it's biblical doesn't really even matter,
of
because
course, of course.
those are not universally held beliefs.
No, no.
And
Obviously, I
yeah,
agree. I could care
yeah,
less what the Bible says, but I'm saying my understanding or my interpretation of the Bible is not one that is pro-life. Like,
right. So are you referencing like the bitter waters first?
yeah, um,
Yeah,
and yeah, or yeah, pretty much. I think I forget if exactly if it's that verse or I know there's a verse which talks about like the first breath. Is
yes.
that the same verse?
No.
It's a different
So
verse. Okay.
I can't remember what chapter and book, but there's this story about an adulterous woman. It's in the Old Testament, um, and a drink of bitter waters is mixed, and it's supposed to basically abort the child if it's from someone else than her husband. So there's that. There's a story of abortion in the Bible. Very twisty, very nasty. But the life at first breath is Mm, I think that's in Psalms, but don't quote me on that. But that's a completely different verse.
Okay, gotcha. And so once this deconstruction process happened, obviously having that have been your identity for so long, what was that process like? What was that experience like? I mean,
Hmm.
it must have been very painful, I'm assuming.
Yes. So, um, and it's a process I'm still going through. Like, and for a lot of people, deconstruction is short, and for others, it lasts forever. And there's there's no end in sight, and there's a lot of different destinations for a lot of people. You know, everything from anti-theist back to a reconstructed Christian. And I am still in that process. I haven't landed anywhere. I haven't made new choices or decisions, but the process itself is like grief,
Right.
where, grief has the stages of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Uh, Deconstruction for me has been very much like that, very like up and down, and coming back, coming back from acceptance to revisit anger or denial. But overall, like it has been extraordinarily painful, and the evangelical community has gotten a hold of the word deconstruction in the last few years, and they have some really twisted, weird ideas about what it is and what it
Right.
isn't. And they've called it sexy or trendy, which is just so,
Dismissive and
thank
bullshit.
you. Yes, exactly. Yeah, very dismissive, and it minimizes the process. And there is absolutely nothing fun about this. Like if I wanted to have fun, I probably would have just stayed a Christian and stayed in stayed in that cognitive dissonance space. But it has been painful, especially the big realizations of things that truly shaped my identity. Like, um, I don't know if you want to get too far into my studies on the misogyny of the Bible and what I've
Oh,
learned, but
please. I would love to. Yeah, 100%.
so there are only a handful of um, passages in the Bible that really dictate how gender roles are supposed to go. And most of them are in the New Testament, and a lot of them are attributed to Paul. But they're like, and I was able to, through scholarship, reconstruct how I felt about all of that, because I understood that before Paul was anything else, Paul was a Roman Jew. He was a member of the Sanhedrin. So he was a product of his belief system, but he was also a Roman. And I love the society of Rome. Maybe I'm somewhere deep down inside, one of those men who thinks about the Roman Empire every day. But I love the history of Rome, but they were not favorable to women all the way back to, you know, the beginning. Um, so, of course, Paul didn't have a very high regard for women. And I was able to revisit those verses in their historical context and understand that that didn't necessarily mean all women for all time. But there was a verse that evangelical Christian men would tell me upheld the role of women, and that would be Genesis 3:16, which states that Eve would be um, under the headship of her husband. And keeping in mind that Genesis is part of the Torah and Jesus was a Jew, I was able to connect with a rabbi and understand um, what the Jewish interpretation of that verse meant. And it was not what I was told. And I remember learning that is probably about 10 months ago. And I bitterly wept um, when I learned that that was more about the the sexual nature of a marriage and who's
Mhm.
allowed to ask for or demand or be entitled to sexual gratification, which is crazy, right? Like that's not
Yeah.
anything you would ever think of would be something. But this rabbi had told me this, and it just created such a grief in me because growing up, I was told that women were in their most godly selves when they were the gentle and quiet spirit, the selfless woman, um, and then my highest honor would be to be a servant unto my family, my husband and my children, and that those things were my greatest opportunity for ministry. And so I was supposed to be silent. I was supposed to be meek. I was supposed to be gentle. I wasn't supposed to be outspoken. Um, and I wasn't allowed to have a whole lot of autonomy. And that without a husband and a family, I didn't really have a place in this like kingdom. And if I did, it would always be in this shadow of like an unmarried woman or whatever. And that, a career was just absolutely out of the question. Just a lot of really like identity shaping things. And I always felt so antithetical to it. So I carried around this feeling of like, I'm not a good biblical woman because I have a lot of opinions and I like to talk and I like to think things through and I'm loud and boisterous and I like to have debates and um, yeah, I was just not a good biblical woman and it felt really awful and I always thought that it was like the thorn in my side that I couldn't achieve this. And when I learned that all those things that shaped that part of me that caused so much pain and so much really like an identity crisis for myself, I, it, I think that was one of the biggest moments, second biggest moments of grief I've faced in my life. Because those things, not only did they shape my personality, but they really determined what pursuits I had in life, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
makes perfect sense. And I think that it is so disturbing that these ideologies basically strip away people's lively. They strip away any sense of control. It is a tool for weak men to control women because they can't handle you know having equal partnerships. And I see lives on TikTok all the time of people saying women should be submissive to men, and of course when you press them, it comes out that they're Christian and they have these ideas about what a woman should be. It's like, fuck you. Like, that's not, you don't get to tell people how to live their lives. And yeah,
Right.
you were not a good Christian woman, because the view of a Christian woman is somebody that has just completely been enslaved to these toxic ideas. And I think it's amazing that given how early on you were indoctrinated into what I view to be a cult, um, that you were able to fight through that, to find your voice, to find your space and to fight back. And I know that it's been painful, and it's an ongoing process. And I can tell, talking with you and looking at you, like, that this is very real right now. It's not
Hmm.
like something you've moved past. It's something you're struggling with every day. um, but I think you should give yourself credit that I think, um, people, I guess I'll phrase it this way. I think you're very brave, and I think that anybody listening to this, as well as you, and I'll tell this to myself too, because sometimes I forget, healing is not linear, right? You're going to have days where you feel like you've made progress, and days where you feel like you're back at square one. And on those days, we have to take a breath, kind of
Hmm.
contextualize everything, and keep moving forward. um, and one day you'll find yourself in a much better place and be like, oh, I'm finally there.
I hope so. And like the feelings and the grief that I have, like it's it did take a while for it to stop hurting so much. I'm getting a
Yeah,
notification. But now when I talk about it, like I think that you could probably even see like I'm affected emotionally. But it's mostly because my agency was taken away from me as a very young girl. And you cannot get the years back.
right.
You can't redirect the trajectory of your life. And so that's one thing that I don't think I will ever stop grieving. Um, I can
Yeah,
be thankful that, like I've had the experiences that I've had and they've made me who I am. But whenever I talk about it and I do seem affected, that is I'm kind of holding space for my younger self to
yeah,
to feel sad
of course.
for the opportunities that that were removed from me before I even knew that they existed. Um, but while we're on this subject, to kind of like shift or pivot a little bit, another piece of my deconstruction that has been really, really big, and I'm not sure if you've talked to many people about this, but it was the ideas and teachings around purity culture, which didn't really have a name, I think, until like the mid 90s when the purity rings started coming out and the purity ceremonies. Those got really crazy long after I had kind of grown up out of them. But kind of to paint a picture, being told that my greatest honor would be for someone to choose me as their wife and like have babies. There was that teaching, but then there was this couple, like like my body was my greatest treasure to give to my husband, my virginity. And the idea of someone else defining you, and then also the one thing that you will bring to the table would be your body. Um, not a good mix of ideas to hand to young people, especially young women. Um, it's very confusing, like really, really confusing. And the purity culture thing of I don't know if you've ever heard me say this on TikTok, but it's kind of silly. But I always say, like, you can't eat Christian dogma as a sandwich. Like, you cannot put it all together and make it digestible. You can eat it in little courses. Like, you can have
Right.
your soup, your salad, and your entree. But when you push it all together, it's a shit sandwich. And when I one like the reason I bring that up is women are told you have to keep covered. Modesty is so important because you cannot cause your brother in Christ to stumble by showing cleavage or too much leg. But in the same breath, they will tell you that men are the divine appointed leader by God, and that men have the authority over women by since all the beginning of time. And it just makes no sense to me. That's just absolutely absurd. You're going to tell me that this person is capable just by having that anatomy to lead me in spiritual and emotional and physical, all these ways they can lead me, but they cannot control their eyes. And if they see my
Mhm.
collarbone, they're going to hell. Oh, like, are you kidding me? Like, come on.
Yeah. It
Anyway,
just doesn't
sorry, that was a
doesn't
little side.
No, that I think is really important to share. I think that um, I understand, and I think you're completely valid in grieving those lost years. But I think you know, and I think it's what you're doing with your platform is now you're in a place where you can teach and educate people about the evil that that are these ideas, and the toxicity that stems from these ideas. I find purity culture to be so disturbing,
It
so
is.
creepy on so many levels. Um, and I also host lives where I talk about purity culture and how dehumanizing it is and how incoherent it is. The entire view of sex by religion is so life denying and oppressive, and it causes so much psychological harm.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when I found your content, I was because TikTok, it's like I don't know, there will be one good live with people I agree with, and then like 50 with like batshit crazy ideas and disgusting viewpoints. So anytime that I can find another creator that's like-minded that I think is doing really good work, it's like a breath of fresh air and a relief. And I really hope that you just continue doing what you're doing because I don't know how I because I know you get probably a lot of hate. Do
Mm-hmm.
you get positive comments and support as well?
Oh yeah, yeah. So I've been talking about deconstruction on TikTok since like the summer of 2021. And I started by sharing my story. I don't, maybe it's my neurodivergence, but I didn't find it sensical to talk about deconstruction without like saying why I had arrived there. So I,
Mhm.
in like 13 parts, told my entire life story up to a certain point. And oh, one of those videos went viral. and it was a video that contained like some some drama, actually drama more so than trauma. Well, yeah, that's that too. But in that video, I the comments in that one that went viral, the amount of hate and vitriol that I received was astounding. But I also made friends that I talk to weekly, and they're like they're my friends. I may never meet them in person, but for the first time in my life, I really have community. So it has been really great to get positive reinforcement. And there, TikTok is what it is. You know, it's an interesting platform with a lot of toxicity, but there is an incredible deconstruction community there that was very vibrant in 2021, and it's kind of slacked off now. But no, I've made really, really great friends and learned so much. So yeah, but yes, the hate, yeah, that mhm, a
And
lot
I
of it.
think that can be really, especially when you're already going through such a period of grief and struggle to try to find your footing, to then be dealing with that level of hate,
Mhm,
has to be really difficult. Again, I'm incredibly lucky in that sense as well, because my psychology is such that I've I'm immune to bullying. Like, I'm immune
mhm,
to it. And so, like, I recently came out as non-binary. I've posted some videos on TikTok, where I'm playing piano. I'm wearing a dress. I mean, have a breastplate on, right? And I didn't even do it as like to make some kind of statement, right? I'm just like
mhm,
existing, right? And I was like, oh, I like this piece of music that I wrote. I'm going to post this. And the amount of hate, I also got support, but the amount of hate that I got was just like crazy. But it goes in one ear or the other for me. Like, it doesn't affect me at all. Um, but I'm always left thinking, like, most people are not like that. And I can't imagine how painful it must be to try to share something so meaningful to you, to the world, and then have that kind of reaction. And I think it's very, again, going back to what I said earlier, brave to fight through that, to continue what you're doing, because ultimately, if you can change the mind of one person and help that one person, I think it's worth it. And all the people that are just wasting their energy hating, I forget those people. You know,
mhm. I first of all, I admire the fact that you do have that resilience and that your psychology is set up that way, because where else can people be as cruel as they can be, other than on the internet? It's like a free pass to be an absolute dickhead.
yeah.
And there are days that I don't give a shit. I'm sorry, I didn't even ask. Can I cuss?
You can cuss as much as you want
Okay.
to.
Okay, cool. I don't know. So there are days that I do not have a fuck to give when someone tells me, "Oh, you're going to hell. You were never a Christian. You're wrong." Whatever they throw at me. But there are other days that certain things hit the spaces in me that are not healed. And those things are usually around my greatest struggles with Christianity, of the things that I'm either still trying to recover from or deconstruct. And it's almost like, God, how do they know? You know? Like I am still wrestling with, I don't know if you happen to catch the most recent thing that I posted, but I'm still wrestling with the cruelty of an omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, involved, sovereign God. If those things are true about God, then God's fucking cruel. He is
Yeah.
the most evil entity ever. Um, but like I recently talked to someone who is a Calvinist, and I was so confronted with just the cruel nature of Christianity that it really stung deep. And I mean, I don't know if you know about Calvinism, but Calvinism is
It's
wild. Like,
Yeah, it makes no sense. It's one of the next to like Mormonism, it's one of the most nonsensical views, in my opinion.
I mean, I've heard people say that it makes absolutely no sense, and then I've heard people explain it that if you if you look at the text from a certain point of view, it makes the most sense. that, but it just really depends on which part of the Bible you're cherry picking
Right.
at
That's
the
I
end
mean
of the
that's
day.
true for all those interpretations. Yeah. It's funny what you mentioned about God being cruel because I've been having this conversation with a Christian for a few days now. Well, they'll say things like, "Well, it's your hubris and it's your
Hmm.
arrogance to think that you would know better than what God has planned."
Hmm.
But my whole response is, well, no, the character of your God is what's in question here, right? You're presupposing and you were defining this God as all good, all just, or always knowing better, so that when we see the worst kinds of things in the world, you can just kind of brush that off and say, well, who are we to challenge God? God is going to know better. Whereas I'm looking at those things as the evidence that your assumptions about this God are incorrect,
Hmm.
and that how could it not have been a better world to create a world where grape was not possible,
Yeah.
where the Holocaust didn't happen,
Hmm.
right? And to think that there would be some unknown reason to us, but known to God, that would justify genocide,
Hmm.
slavery, all these things is madness. It's like just a crystallization of that dogma that no matter what evidence you point to, they're just gonna try to um, rationalize it away or define it away in ways that don't make any sense. So
Yes. I don't even know where to start. There's so many ideas or so many like thoughts. Um, I lived in that self delusion for a long time where something awful would happen in the world and it would really, really hurt to deal with just as a human. And then I would have to think I used to say God is sovereign. God is still on his throne, is one of those platitudes that's often thrown out in evangelical Christian spaces. That even though this thing is horrible, God is going to use it to define or to achieve his good and perfect purpose. Um, yeah, it is revolting because at some point you start to justify um, things that happen in the world and even give them purpose.
yeah,
Like for instance, something, I mean, I don't want to get too deep into this because it's just a shit show of a topic for everybody, but what's happening in Gaza right now, the evangelical Christian response to that is absolutely revolting. Thankfully, it's kind of quieted down some, but their big thing with it is all of this is going to lead to the second coming of Christ. Like, oh my God, you've got to be kidding me. So all these
yeah,
people have to die
yeah.
so
Children
that
have
he
to
can
die.
come back.
Yeah,
Like,
children have to die so this prophecy can be realized. It's just insanity.
it is.
Um, yeah, it's so dehumanizing. Yeah. I,
So I mean, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you guys, this one's not going anywhere. I'll bring it up again in a second.
No, I was gonna ask like what is or what are your responses to the whole like prophecy talk? Because to me, prophecy is like the least convincing of the arguments people try to run. But I'm curious to,
Mhm.
to know like what your response is to this claims about prophecy.
Yeah, prophecy is especially apocalyptic prophecy in the Bible. I call it the peel and stick scripture, um, because you can, it's like the adhesive never really runs out. Like you can just keep applying it to new ages and new things that are happening in the world. In my lifetime alone, I think I have lived through 3 or 4 dozen different rapture predictions.
Yeah.
And this stuff goes all the way back. And then when I learned that like all of these rapture ideologies, like the tribulation and all of those things were were what most evangelical Christians would consider heresy. John Nelson Darby stuck together some verses from Daniel, Isaiah, First Thessalonians, Revelation, and created a doctrine, and even had his own Bible with his own footnotes, um, and told everybody that this is the biblical truth, and it somehow stuck, and that was in 1840. Which the whole story of the Great Disappointment still makes me laugh. I don't. Do you know that one?
I don't think so.
So in 1840, I think it's like 1841. Let's say that that's right. John Nelson Darby, the creator of Rapture Dogma, um, had predicted that this is the day that Jesus is going to come back. So his followers all sold everything that they owned and they went and stood in a field and waited. And of course, the day goes by and nothing happens. And so someone walks up to John Nelson Darby and says, "Sir, this has been a great disappointment." And it went into the papers.
Wow.
So this stuff is this stuff has been around for quite some time. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't put any weight in prophecy. Like I said, I call it the peel and stick of scriptures.
It's always things like, how could they have known that this conflict was going to take place, or that this temple was going to be this? Or it's like, yeah, conflict has always existed.
Hmm.
Famine has always existed. The drying up of rivers has always existed. How would this be impressive? Aside from the fact that a lot of these prophecies were written after the fact to make it look like they're being, the people don't realize this. They don't
Hmm.
realize how much fabrication comes along with these books. Um, but yeah, what were you going to say earlier? You wanted to mention something.
Um, no, I think
Right.
it slipped because we started talking about
Or-
prophecy.
No, no worries, no worries.
um, if it comes back, I'll let you know.
Sure. Um, I guess let me ask you this then. Um, what is some advice that you would give to somebody who has just started their kind of deconstruction journey, uh, from your perspective?
Ooh. So I don't ever want to tell anybody else how to deconstruct, but I think there are some like generalized things that are good to do. When you first start to look at everything, it's really, really overwhelming, and there's this sense of like, how do I even begin to review any of this? Like my one of my first thoughts was like, oh my God, I don't think I believe in the resurrection, the virgin birth. Like it went deep. So I sat down and wrote out five or six things that were just really problematic for me. And then I went and sought out at that time biblical scholars who still, I guess they would be considered like progressive Christians. And I read from that perspective, and then branched out into um, more actual scholarship with no professed belief, just
Mhm.
history, and that was my process. And to be patient with yourself because it is difficult,
Of course,
and also do not accept any coffee dates from anyone you went to church with. That's just not going to end
that's
well.
not going to go well. Yeah.
It's not going to go well.
Um, I was going to say, is there something that might went out of my brain? Um, can't remember. What was it? You said something, and it slipped out of my mind. But I guess one thing I could say is, oh, that's what I was going to ask. Is when you start to move away from Christianity, did you start studying any other religions as well?
This one has enough problems of its own. Judaism definitely, obviously, I have a lot of interest in, and my rabbi friend has taught me a lot. But I would say I know, like, a shaving of Judaism. Um, but I haven't touched on much. And when I was younger, I read a lot about like Baha'i and Buddhism and a little bit of Islam, but not enough to say that I'm super educated. And I also, I mean, I have a strong interest in um, the pagan faith,
Mhm.
and I love mythology, but I've never really given it a whole lot of thought because this one presents enough challenges of its own that oh,
Oh, let me sip here.
sorry. I
You're
had a
good.
notification. I just haven't gotten there yet. And I honestly, I think that if I ever do arrive anywhere, it's just it's probably going to be apathy. Like I don't think
Apathy.
I'm going to seek out another faith practice.
Would you say that? Uh, would you label yourself an atheist at this point?
No, not yet. No, um, I have a hard time picking a label for myself. I'm not. I'm not atheist. I still do hold um, even a picture of God and an idea of God. And maybe that's because I'm 43 for 30 years of my life, that more than 30 years, that was just such a big deal. And to let it go, even after 8 years of working through it, is still too much. And I wouldn't say that I'm agnostic yet either, because I still have such an interest in the the Christian God, and in the story and the ministry of Jesus. But I think, again, I'm trying to work through whether or not that's emotional attachment and even a little bit of trauma and the fear of saying like, yeah, okay, I don't believe. But I mean, I pendulum back and forth. There are days that I'm like, I don't believe anything.
Oh, that's
But
that's fair.
yeah, no label right now.
Yeah, and I don't. Who says that anybody has to have a label? You know,
Right.
I would say that what has convinced me that this the no God exists. One is, to me, the fact that I don't see any convincing evidence that justifies the claim,
Yeah.
right? And so, um, unless there is some positive evidence for the claim, I can just reject it. I don't need people are always like, oh, well, can you disprove God? No, I don't need to. If you can provide me with evidence, I can reject it at face value. Two, I think a lot of the depictions of God are contradictory. Like we were saying earlier, like this, how can he be all loving and all powerful and allow for evil? Doesn't make sense.
I
The
mean,
whole free
Christians,
will thing is good.
yeah, Christians will tell you the free will exists. Evil exists because of free will, right? But free will is a biblical concept. It is not in the Bible anywhere. That is extrapolation from a handful of verses. Uh, we don't have, under the Christian ideology, you do not have free will. You have one of two outcomes. You either confess belief and follow, or you don't, and then you are headed for eternal conscious torment, which is the majority of Christianity holds an idea of an afterlife with eternal conscious torment. So that's not necessarily free will; it's a freedom of choice.
It's a
And they've
coerced choice.
yeah, and they'll blame everything on free will, which is just really
Well,
that's
but,
not
but the
that.
question there is, okay, even if free will was a thing, well, who gave us free will? God gave us free will. God gave us free will with the knowledge that it would lead to evil. So to say that God is not responsible for evil when He gave us the circumstances that would lead to evil, and then whose free will does He respect? That of the perpetrator over the victim? And why does He not care about free will in the times where He does intervene in the Bible and genocides everybody? Right?
Hmm.
It's completely inconsistent every way, all the way through. But
And the, okay, so when it comes to like the conversation around proof of God, no one can prove that he does exist, but I don't think anyone can adequately prove that he doesn't, because God is a concept. It's a concept.
yeah, and but that's the thing. It's right. I don't ask for proof of God, and I don't claim to
Hmm.
disprove God. I ask for convincing evidence, credible evidence that would justify the claim. Right. So we can throw proof and certainty out the window. It's not necessary.
Hmm.
Um, when that evidence cannot be provided, and people talk about, well, I've had this experience and I stopped doing drugs, and I believe I was filled with the Holy Spirit. How can you show me that all of that, as powerful as it may have been, even life changing, is not purely psychological? They can't do it other than saying, well, I just feel that way. So what? And so I think it's that perspective that's led me to just think that atheism is the more rational position to take ultimately.
And like I don't set out to like have anybody be deconverted. If their faith, which is their own truth, and I know a lot of people would argue with me that there's no such thing as like a subjective personal truth when it comes to God, which I find kind of dismissive. I mean, faith, if someone's faith makes them a better person and they are kinder, or they stop doing drugs and harming themselves, and that has led them to a better life with hope and peace, I mean, more power to you. Just
Mhm.
don't do any harm and don't legislate it. Like,
Right.
I mean, don't force it on others. I don't really care if people believe in anything or
Yeah,
nothing.
I would just say that like all those positive things that you can derive, that you can get to from religion, you can get to without it. It
You
might be a
can.
little bit harder maybe, but
Mm,
um,
I think it would be easier from my perspective as being someone who is
right.
indoctrinated. I think that, when I review in hindsight my experience as an evangelical Christian and I try to pull out like the good things. Um, one of the things that I know, um, well, no, I was going to say like my ability to really embrace and lean into my personal compassion for others. But I think it was more taught to me by my dad, who credited the story of Christ. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I really think that the things that you can glean, like peace and comfort and a sense of purpose, I think those things are actually a whole lot easier if you have not been indoctrinated in religion, because you're living in a substantive, like it's this, I can't make words come out of my mouth. Like it's that you're living in reality. It's a tangible reality,
Yeah.
and there's nothing else. Like this is it, you know. So I I think it probably would be easier without religion.
That's an interesting perspective. I often hear from people that are religious who seem unable to have an idea of meaning outside of a God-given meaning. They're like, well, if we're all going to die, why does it matter anyway? I'm like, because it's the only thing that could possibly matter, right? Just because my life might end doesn't mean that the quality of my life while I'm alive isn't something I should care about. Just because a song ends doesn't mean that it's less beautiful, right?
Hmm.
I never understood that psychology, that perspective that like, nothing matters unless we live forever or unless there
Oh,
is this being out there. Like, doesn't make sense.
um, yeah. The that idea of like being heavenly minded, or what we called it when I was in church, was like being kingdom minded. Everything in your life revolved around what what glory was it going to bring to God. So people who could sing, they needed to sing for Jesus, or it was worthless. People who were talented in any way, shape, or form. Like myself, I consider myself a good writer, and I spent so many years trying to figure out how, as a woman, I could use that talent for the purpose of bringing glory to God. Like we're kind of come full circle again of like taking away someone's agency and making people into a monolith, and removing the meaning behind the one thing that we are guaranteed, which is this present moment, and in the grand scheme of things, the life that we have. And I think that even folks who are Christians, if they would reframe the way that they think about things, and instead of thinking about how they have to proselytize to every person they come across, and instead, like, just be kind, be loving,
Yeah,
embrace hospitality and charity, and like make this life that you have the best you can possibly make it with the precepts of your faith. And instead they turn it on its head and make it completely about the not guaranteed afterlife.
yeah.
I
I
mean,
think it devalues life. Yeah.
absolutely does.
I in some weird way, like I almost am glad for the awful Christians on TikTok because I think it does it brings more people away from that toxic ideology. Like obviously, I wish more people were kind and that was the norm. But in a context where I think ultimately the ideas present in these books are not good ones. Um,
Yeah, on the whole, not
yeah,
good. Correct.
people like that, you know, I think help my job, make my job easier. Which is I think to kind of spread education, try to get people to you know care about critical thinking and being able to defend their. I mean, I just had a Christian the other day threaten to dox me, right?
Yeah.
And this is somebody who talks about how you can't have objective morality outside of the Christian God, and then he's in my DMs telling me that I should like kill myself, and then he's gonna dox me like all the. And it's just like the how fake and
Mhm.
it's just insane. I don't know.
And actually, you remember like 20 minutes ago, I was like, there was something I was going to say. That's what
Yes.
it was. That's what it was. Like when people talk about how, oh, you're an atheist, where do you get your morals from? And then they go through this weird, and it's always like a scripted conversation of like, oh, so you think doing this XYZ horrible thing is fine, because they find like there's no relative source for your morality. And in the same breath, even when I was someone who fully believed the Bible and was going to church, I always thought that that was so disgusting. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't need a book to tell me not to steal, not to kill people, not to rape people. I don't need that for my morality, my empathy as a human, knowing that if I went and poked you in the eye, that is going to hurt you. And like you don't do those things to other people that cause harm. That is just insane to me. Like that is scary. So if that book didn't exist, like, dude, what are you going to be doing? I guess doxing people and telling them that they should kill themselves,
Right.
which I've received some of those things as well. I mean, people are really crazy. I have to say this. I have to. I know progressive Christians, even clergy, that have more in common with you and me than they do with people who do things like that you were
Yeah.
talking about. They are out there, but unfortunately, they are the exception and not the rule. And
Right.
the insane ones and the cruel ones are far more outspoken.
And I think what's ironic is that I think they're so deeply anti-Christian. Um,
Yes,
it's just, yeah, it's crazy. I don't know. I'm just of the opinion that, like, I try to. I respect people. I don't respect ideas, right? And
that's fair.
I try to engage with kindness, but I also tend to kind of match energy as well. Um, I think I'm very triggered by unearned arrogance. So when I get people that have no way to justify their claims, talking about, you know, talking as though they have the truth, it just I'm like, yeah, you're an idiot. You have no idea what you're talking about. And I don't know.
Mm.
I try really hard to find common ground with people who see the world differently than I do, but I'm noticing it's becoming harder as I get older. I find myself less patient to,
That's a
that kind
real
of stuff.
thing.
Yeah.
It is. And I of course have had an uncountable amount of conversations with Christians in the last 2.5 years, I guess. While I'm on the other side of the fence or adjacent to them in a belief system, and the certainty is astounding. Um, where something will be literally in black and white in their book, and they will say, "Well, that is not what it means. This is what it means to," like they will literally deny the truth that is right in front of them to continue to remain right and certain and and arrogant, and it is unfounded. It's extraordinarily unfounded.
W-
I encounter it all the time.
We're close to the 1 hour mark, but I wanted to ask you at least one more question. We were talking about purity culture earlier, and that's something that I'm very interested in. And I guess one question I'd ask is like, what do you think are good strategies? And I know you said this is not going to work for everybody, but maybe in general, sort of navigate the sexual shame that cultures like that lead to.
Oh my gosh, that is actually a really tough question. And just FYI, I don't. I'm enjoying this. I don't necessarily have to leave right at the 1 hour mark, so we're good.
Oh, okay,
No rush
gotcha.
unless you need to go. Um, so I can only speak from my experience as a woman. Um, I think finding even now I'm like these things are hard to talk about. Finding a way to understand and embrace your own sexuality by yourself first is imperative, and to allow yourself to feel pleasure and not have any sort of shame attached to it, and get some therapy for that. um,
Yeah.
Therapy for people who are deconstructing, especially evangelical Christianity with this side of purity culture. Yeah, and realizing how do I say this without like giving away too okay, so I used to say this, like, I believe that God made our hands reach our groins for other reasons than washing, you know?
Hmm.
Like there's
Yeah,
even if we were created by some divine being, I don't think that there's any shame in that. But yeah, like but it is tough because even the shapes of our bodies are considered sinful and dirty, and that's a lot to overcome. So therapy, definitely, and
yeah,
self-love.
sure.
There are a lot of really good books out there too, but I know not everyone enjoys reading. Um, but yeah, I could make some book recommendations. I can't think of there's one author, I'll have to message you
Sure.
in case this ever comes up again, that wrote a book. Um, the title's like a euphemism, something like "come." So I'll have to remember. "Come as you are." That's what it's called.
Oh, that's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I like that. Um, yeah, I mean, you don't have to go into detail on this part because I don't know your situation, but I always wondered what it's like for a household where a person deconstructing, you know, is with a partner who's not on the same page, or if you have children with a person, what that dynamic would be, because it seems to me it would be really problematic.
So uh, I'm divorced from my ex-husband, and I have been a long time, long before I even deconstructed. We got divorced, and I started my deconstruction about 5 or 6 years later.
Oh, okay.
So I can't speak to that, but I feel a more interesting and complicated, from my point of view, it's more complicated. But my son, my 18-year-old son, is um, is an evangelical Christian, and he attends church every Sunday and every Wednesday. He's very involved at school with some Christian groups and prioritizes reading his Bible and all of those things. So, and I share custody with my ex-husband, whose father is a pastor, and he, as you know, is a former pastor and is now like a non-vocational youth pastor. So he doesn't do it for a living anymore; it's volunteer. So he's very ingrained in it 50% of his life. And he and I have had some very difficult conversations, but I have to remember, and I think I would do the same if I were partnered with or married to someone who was still Christian, um, that is theirs, and this is mine, and all I can do is ask questions and challenge the precepts that come up as they do. I would never, I mean, my son is 18 and he has been participating in this since he was a baby. um, so it's his life, and all I can do is gently pull out truths where I can. So he is he has deconstructed the idea that women have to be silent in churches, which is really great. Um, he thankfully has avoided purity culture and
Yeah.
has a very healthy body image. I don't want to talk too much about him because
Of
he
course, of
deserves
course,
his autonomy.
of course.
But yeah, that it has been a very difficult space to navigate. And I think it's just important that as much as I am deserving of my deconstruction, they're deserving of their faith.
Sure.
But it doesn't stop me from asking questions and challenging things. But I know a lot of people who are married to a person of faith, and they have fully deconstructed to anti-theism, and thankfully they're still together and like they love each other enough to somehow make that work. I personally don't know if I could remain in that situation myself.
Oh, I know I would not be able to. I know that much. Um, I mean, again, I have plenty of friends that are of different religious faiths. I can have civil conversations with even sometimes awful people.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, like I on that level, like I, I do seek people that have the same values as me in that sense and perspectives as me. Um, and I can't imagine how difficult it would be to, you know, be in those dynamics. I don't
Well, I
know.
mean, I think as long as the person that I was with didn't hold fast to certain pieces of things, like if they just if they had what I call like a Micah 6:8 kind of a relationship. So the verse, I still love this verse. I still think it's beautiful. Micah 6:8 says, "What then, O mortal, does the Lord require of you, but to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God?" And I think that if you're going to have a faith, that's about the only one that I think I could live in a community with, and that closely. Like, do your thing, I'll do mine, and be a good person.
Is that your favorite Bible verse?
It actually, yes, it actually is. I I still love that verse. I still think that it's incredibly profound that it says your God. You know, it doesn't just put an emphasis. It says your God, and there are actually a lot of places in the Old and New, well, really just the Old Testament that um, proves that there's polytheistic ideologies throughout that scripture, but
Do you know?
that's been erased.
Um, I don't know if you remember this, but how do you pronounce Job? Is that
Yeah,
Job?
Job. Uh-huh.
23. I think it's my favorite verse.
Oh no.
Um, yeah, because it just shows kind of, I think, well, yeah, I can read it. Um, but if I go to the east, he is not there. If I go to the west, I do not find him. When he's at work in the north, I do not see him. When he turns to the south, I catch no glimpse of him. But he knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I will come forth as gold. My feet have closely followed his footsteps. I have kept to his way without turning aside. I have not departed from the commands of his lips. I have treasured the words of his mouth more than my daily bread. But he stands alone. Who can oppose him? He does whatever he pleases. He carries out his decree against me. And many such plans he still has in store. That is why I am terrified before him. When I think of all of this, I fear him. God has made my heart faint. The Almighty has terrified me. That verse right there captures to me the inherently abusive relationship that Christianity, or that these religions in general, depict between us and God. It is so abusive at the core, and there's almost this, like, what is that psychological phenomenon called? I'm trying to remember, where, like, somebody's victim will will um, almost like lead them in their victimhood to, like, stand by their abuser.
Stockholm.
Stockholm, thank you. There's like a Stockholm element to this kind of dynamic, uh, that I notice, but I don't know.
Oh, definitely. And like as you were reading that, I was reading along with you and I was thinking about how I felt when I read Job as a Christian and thinking, wow, even as he can recognize that God is nowhere, and not only that, like he can't find him right now, but he is in extraordinarily like mortal danger at what God could do to him even now. Into when you get when you've gotten all the way to Job 23, Job has been through it, and he still knows that God isn't done hurting him. And then the last few parts of that verse, he is like, "Yet still I praise him." And yeah, that is so reading that as a Christian, I was like, wow, wow, with the faith of Job, like if only I could have that kind of a faith. But now, like reading it again, yeah, it's absolutely abusive and harmful and scary.
Yeah.
Um, and like this comes up a lot when I'm talking about things that are difficult for Christians to listen to. They will say, "Well, we are His creation. He can do whatever He wants with us."
Which is like literally just supporting tyranny. Like, what about him being creating us, even if that was true, makes it right that he could do whatever he wanted to with us? Like, that
Mhm.
doesn't follow at all.
Yeah, and then that conversation goes in circles too, because I'll say, I technically created my son, and I
Yeah.
would never purposely harm him. I would never put him in danger to test his allegiance and love for me. Like I would never hurt him. And then they'll be like, "Well, your morality isn't God's morality."
Yeah, it's
And at this
better.
point,
Your
I'm like,
morality
"My
is better.
morality is better." Yes.
Right. And that's
Um,
the thing. Yeah. Right. There's nothing, diminishing morality to mere power is just disturbing. Let me address a couple of the comments here. Uh, there's a question for you. Where do you get your joy from now that you're atheist? My kids bring me joy. Well, first of all, you haven't said, we were talking about earlier, you have
Mhm,
not given any kind of label to where you're at. You're just in a process of self-discovery.
mhm.
Um, where do you get your joy from? I'll answer that as well.
So I want to say before where I get my joy from now. I want to address the fact that I did not have much real joy as a Bible believing evangelical Christian. I was in a constant state of just I would have called it then conviction. So I get my joy now from the fact that this life is absolutely incredulous. Like the fact that I exist is, an 8 billion and one chance, and that there's so much beauty in the world, um, physical beauty. I love being out in nature, but more than anything, it's just the fact that I have a life. I have a child. I have breath in my lungs, and that's enough. And just to come back to the reason that I was not in a real sense of joy, the Bible says, count it as pure joy, my brothers, when you face trials of many kinds. And so growing up, I internalized that if I was happy or jubilant or at peace, that I was somehow in sin. So
Right.
I've let that go, and that brings a lot of peace. What are your
Um,
questions? Sorry, that's kind of a
no,
strange question to me.
no, you're good. And I'll answer that way too. I find joy from engaging in the things that bring me joy. Music, art, friendships, relationships, um, learning about life, uh, try my best to make my life uh, feel fulfilling. And I don't need to believe your metaphysics
Hmm.
to achieve those states of being. Like, yeah, another question the same person asks is how do atheists, how can they stay happy without his light and life within them? Another thing he said also, his kingdom is within you. He showed you the way. Purify yourself. Well, my view
Mm,
is that there's nothing to purify,
interesting.
right? All I care about when somebody makes a claim is, can you provide credible evidence to justify it? If you can't, then I'm just not going to believe the same things that you're going to believe. I stay happy. Again, I don't even know what that means, right? Happiness is fleeting like any other emotion. We're in a
Hmm.
flux of, you know, happiness, sadness, anger. I, what I can hope for is to reach a state of peace and contentment in my life, right?
Hmm.
But I'm also somebody who values the idea of passion and of discomfort as a tool for growth. And I stay happy by, doing the things that bring my life meaning. Music,
Absolutely.
philosophy, engaging with people like you, like what we're doing now. And I don't need to believe that I will, go to heaven after my death and be with God forever to feel that meaning, to feel that happiness, to feel that purpose. Um, his evidence is within you. You have just forgotten. No, there's nothing about my existence or anybody's existence that is evidence that a God exists. These are just claims, right? Anybody can make all the claims that they want, right? That's a complete non sequitur. I can exist purely as a naturalistic process. Like nature brought me here, unguided, unconscious, without intent, but I am here, and because I can experience, I can create my purpose, find those things which fulfilled me, and I don't have to lie to myself about the state of my knowledge. Um, so that is how I would answer that.
What was the other question that this person asked?
Just where you get your joy,
Oh,
you
okay.
know.
Um, one of the greatest joys in my life right now is having conversations like this.
Yeah.
Um, because I for so long I wasn't able to really challenge any ideas. I mean, Christianity is not a place where you are welcome to wrestle with doubt or interpretations, translations, all those things. So this has always been so cathartic for me.
Yeah.
But it's so, I mean, I said that's a weird thing to ask because I I have a question for them. Why is why would you ask that question? Do you think that the only source of joy is your faith? And how sad is that? Have you been to a forest?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to be like condescending, but like the world is really beautiful and like people can be awful, of course, but they can also be like yourself, like amazing, intelligent, and there's so much joy to find. It's almost like it's a choice. It is a choice.
But the assumption from that perspective is that, well, all of this is here because of God. But I don't share that assumption, right? And I my how would I say this? My standard for evidence is far higher than just making the assumption that, oh, well, we exist, somebody must have created us, right? That's just a claim. Again, I don't care about claims, I care about evidence. um so, I it is what it is. We just fundamentally start from two different ways of looking at the world.
Yeah,
um
and I mean more power to them, but it just kind of that perspective kind of makes me sad. And when I said that I lived in like a constant state of conviction, um, hmm, if you like if you weren't hurting for something in your life and you thought that everything was going really well, you were in denial about sin in your life, you know, like, and I was so focused on being as Christ-like as possible that everything caused me sadness. And like I said, like even when I felt happy, I'm like, "Ooh, something's not right." There's somewhere I'm not giving credit to God for the good things in my life. So it was a really messed up kind of place to come to.
I'm going to respond. We can
Oh,
respond to this, and then I'll probably start wrapping it up. But
okay.
so, what keeps you alive every day? How can you live without His fire inside you to give to others, ignite the light within you? Again, like, if you're telling us that the only thing that motivating you to live is your belief in God, I urge you to find alternatives to come to the realization that is not necessary.
Hmm.
Um, I, I think we all go through suffering. We all have our baggage, but I don't need the belief in God to have a reason to live, right? What keeps me alive is my desire to live, my desire to learn, my desire to connect with other people, my desire to engage in those things which fulfill me, like art, music, philosophy, sex, like all the things of that nature that I think are make life beautiful. And if you're going to say that this fire exists or this God exists, provide evidence that justify it. Don't just assume it because you feel real strongly that it's the case. You know, your psychology and your feelings don't dictate truth any more than
Hmm.
mine do. Right? I would never tell somebody because I don't feel God exists, therefore I know God doesn't exist. Right? That's not how I arrive at what I believe. But what would you like to add to that?
Um, hmm. That I don't. I mean, I don't want to get assumptive about this person, but it just seems like that's such a sad and cold place to be.
Yeah.
And like there is within us as humans, I think, a a generalized passion and fire um, for poetry and sex and food and music and art and the forest. Like that doesn't. It just makes me incredibly sad that someone would hold that belief and put everything, like we were talking about earlier, everything
Yeah.
back to the glory of God. That is a very sad place to be. And I believe that someone can be a Christian and believe that they have that fire, but also recognize their humanity and like, I mean, life is pretty sweet sometimes, like literally sweet. Um, there's so much beauty, and it does not all necessarily have to be related to a deity. It can just be beautiful.
And the idea that, like, if you were to find out God didn't exist, that you would stop loving your children or stop caring about the quality of your life or stop caring about the future, if that is somebody's psychology,
Hmm.
that person needs help. That person needs, therapy. That person needs to really think about. what they're living for. You know?
Definitely. And I mean that, but that hypothetical situation is one that they could never fathom. And if they did, they
Right.
would consider it blasphemy, you know?
Exactly.
Like they
And that's
won't
a
even,
trap. Yeah.
right. Um, so I know you need to go, but I have two things that I wanted to run by
Yes.
you as
Please.
someone who hosts lives from an atheist perspective. This is a very atheist perspective. So one thing that I can't get, and I'm just kind of like sharing thoughts. One thing
Mhm.
that I can't get over about the Christian ideology of God is their their perception of the Bible. So they don't really believe that God would have just randomly intervened in things like the Holocaust or genocide throughout history. But somehow they believe that God put his hand over a book and kept it from being corrupted, molested,
Yeah.
and changed for the sake of power, which we actually have demonstrable evidence that that happened. And that's just such a weird dichotomy to me. It's like God does not intervene. God's will is God's will. He doesn't, he doesn't meddle in the lives of humans, but somehow he managed to protect a text. But kids with ass cancer, good luck.
It's completely contradictory every step of the way because we're told, well, God doesn't intervene. That's why we see evil because of free will. But then we see all the times where God does intervene. Um, uh, we hear, well, God is all good and all loving, and then you get people, like you said, children dying of
Hmm.
cancer.
Sorry for being
Uh,
vulgar.
no, 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 no. I fucking curse all the time in here, so you're fine.
Yeah, but I mean, saying kids with ass cancer, that's a pretty cool thing to say.
No, no, but it's, and look, as somebody that lost, you know, a person who I loved so deeply to cancer, to leukemia, and I saw that happen, in front of me, and I had Christians against our wishes trying to come into the hospital room
God, I remember this
to,
story.
like that right there, I think shows, I think, who people, the real humanity are, and it, yeah, I just find it, if a God exists, he cannot be both all good and all powerful. Given what, if these words are to mean anything, if morality is to, goodness is to mean anything, it can't just be, I'm just going to call whatever God does as good because it's God. Like that
Hmm.
doesn't mean anything. The
I
same
mean,
person.
even, oh, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. They asked, how do you control your desires as an atheist? By recognizing that I don't want to hurt other people, and that if there are things I desire that I come to understand are ultimately harmful, by having the discipline and the morality and the will to not engage in those things. And then those desires that are not problematic, um, I embrace those desires and I live out those desires. And I don't tell myself that I'm a disgusting sinner because of those desires. So,
Yeah. Also, empathy exists,
empathy, yes.
and that's how I control my temper, or what. That's such a strange thing to say.
You said, was there something else you also wanted to ask? We should see, there were a couple of things.
Yeah, it's this is I guess my last little piece of input. The other, I call them my brain hangnails. The other one that I'm stuck on right now is I believe that Christians have intellect. I don't think that they're all, brainwashed zombies. So I think, there's someone who's like walking along with their intellect and their analytical ideas and all of this, but then they come to faith, and at some point there has to be a fork in the road where they say, okay, I know that this is not realistic in this reality that I'm living in. Things like walking on water and wine, water turning into wine, or talking bushes and whatever. That stuff is not real. But I am going to set aside my intellect and my my mind, and I'm going to believe that this is truth. I believe that the core motivation for setting aside your intellect is fear and nothing else. And you can call it faith. I love God. But why do you have faith and why do you love God? Okay, you can keep talking, but when you get down to the core of it, you were afraid of God and what God could do to you, just like Job. And I think that that's a really sad place to live your life.
Yeah,
And I can't get past it.
I think there are plenty of intelligent people who are either too afraid or driven by not a desire for truth, but a desire for comfort, a
Mm-hmm.
desire to feel like things make sense. Whereas for me, having the background that I have, right? And I don't know if you ever read Descartes, the Descartes' meditations. The
No,
Okay, so
not yet.
his project basically is one that he tries to deconstruct everything he assumes to be true to try to see, is there anything I can be certain of, right? People struggle with deconstructing their assumptions because it brings discomfort, it brings chaos, uncertainty. I'm somebody, again, going back to feeling like, I have a lot of issues, right? But I'm also very lucky in certain kinds of ways where I'm comfortable in that chaos. It's going to sound contradictory, but I'm comfortable in that kind of discomfort. I don't feel the need to manufacture answers to questions that are open ended or unresolved. Um, and so that is sort of the way that I think about it. Is that, like, yeah, I don't think that just because somebody's religious they're stupid. There's plenty of highly intelligent people that are religious, but I think they are motivated by either things that they just have not been able to critically face, or for some people it's an issue of identity, right? Like, it is hard for people to let go of of something that they've been a part of for 30 years, right? And this is why I said, like, I look up to you in that sense, because I find that very brave, that you're in that process. And I almost felt like I was mentioning earlier about the video I posted where people were calling me brave for expressing my gender publicly, but I didn't find it brave because there was no fear on my end, because I don't give a shit, right? Whereas people that are scared, people that are whose that journey is a hard one, to let go of these expectations, and they fear how they may be viewed, or all those things. That does take courage, and I think that's a beautiful thing. Um, Real quick, I'll just answer this last question. How do you use philosophy to discipline yourself? I mean, philosophy is an incredibly powerful tool for discipline. Again, depending on which philosophy you're talking about, but um, the recognition, virtue ethics, for example, right? The idea that we shouldn't just seek any desire, but that we should figure out, okay, which desires are life affirming versus which desires are actually not conducive to well being and flourishing and meaning. Um, all these things, I've arrived to those understandings through my study of philosophy. I'm probably, ironically, a better Christian than a lot of the Christians that we engage with. Like you were saying earlier about, like, the Christians that have more in common with us than the
Mm-hmm.
evangelicals. Um, all of that is through philosophy. Um, but was there anything else that you? By the way, I would absolutely love to have you back, because this is probably one of my favorite conversations that I've had.
Man, thanks.
Doing this for I think 3 years now. I think you have so much to say, and I definitely would love to, maybe next time, if you can come back, learn more about how you interpret the Bible, and some of the different views to sort of navigate Scripture. I think that would be a really interesting conversation.
Oh yeah, I absolutely would. I can talk about that for a long time.
Awesome.
It might bore you,
No, no, at
but
all.
yeah, I've enjoyed it as well. It's really I'm nervous on podcasts.
I
I really have you're a great host. Thank you so
Thank you.
much for this.
I think you were great. Nothing to be nervous about, but uh, I definitely hope to have you back as soon as possible. And blessed, see, philosophy is not a good way to push forward this in discipline. I completely disagree. I mean, I don't know how much philosophy you've read. You saying fate is the only way, I would just call that indoctrination. I think philosophy is an incredible, powerful tool, and maybe you haven't been exposed to that. Maybe you haven't taken the time to educate yourself on that side of things. I think faith is an unreliable path to truth. People can have faith in completely contradictory claims, and I don't think it's useful in trying to understand what is true and what isn't. Having said that, I appreciate your time, Amy. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
coming on here.
Thanks for
Um,
having me.
I appreciate those that came by and listened to this, and definitely I would also love to have you on my TikTok lives at some point,
Yeah, let me
if
know
you're going to come on there.
anytime.
So
Sure.
thank you everybody for coming on, and I'll be back soon with another episode of Axioms on Trial. Stay safe, everybody, and I'll talk to you again soon.